Are the Rays loading up to go after Ketel Marte? We'll talk about the latest on the D-backs All-Star second baseman. A minor trade over the weekend involving reliever Kyle Backhus. We'll break that down. Also, the return of Ildemaro Vargas, a utility infielder, and the Padres made a run at Merrill Kelly. We will discuss all those topics on this episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. So hello everyone, welcome in to another D-backs Under Review podcast episode. I'm Mike McDermott, publisher for D-backs Under Review, the newsletter you can find on Substack at dbacksunderreview.com. Again, if you're joining here watching on YouTube, we're premiering every episode now. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and comment, either in the chat or comment in the video if you missed the premiere. What you think, is Ketel Marte going to be picked up by the Rays? Let us know about that. So, again, a little bit of a personal note before we start. I have agreed to write for Heavy Sports. I'll be writing about the Diamondbacks on Heavy Sports, and we're going to try and, I guess you can say, dominate the Google search market and try and get as much content out to you as possible. The newsletter will still be there for the deep dive analysis, prospect analysis, as well as stuff that isn't necessarily search algorithm friendly. You know, you talk about, I guess you can say, like the impact of each move in a way. And the podcast will still be going. We'll be doing 2 episodes a week every Monday, Friday, premiering at 9 o'clock a.m. Arizona time. And that's what we're going to do. So, that's kind of the rundown of what I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future and try and see how much viability I have in the baseball writing industry. But enough about me. Let's talk about the team. So, starting off, Ketel Marte. It seems like we're going to be at a point where the Ketel Marte trade rumors, I feel like we're in the last couple weeks of it. It's a situation where the Diamondbacks will likely pull Marte off the market pretty soon if they don't get a deal that they like. And it's kind of interesting because the Marte trade rumors are kind of holding up the offseason as a whole. Teams are kind of waiting to see if he's available, and there's a reason for that, because Marte's remaining present-day value is less than half of what the Phillies paid to re-sign Schwarber, 5 years, $150 million. Pete Alonso got 5 years, $155 million from the Baltimore Orioles. Ketel Marte is worth less than half of what Schwarber got. He's got $72.7 million. When you factor in 41 of the 91 remaining salary is deferred. So at the present-day cost of half of what it takes to get Schwarber and Alonso, and these are two hitters that, if you go by WRC Plus on Fangraphs since 2023, Marte actually outperforms Alonso and Schwarber, even though the latter two have played more games and have more home runs. And the one area where Marte obviously excels is Marte can hit for average, whereas Alonso is pretty much a decent batting average, high slug guy. Schwarber is a 3 true outcomes hitter, strikeout, walk, home run. And whereas Marte can hit 290, Marte's a 280, 290 hitter with those home runs and a high on-base percentage, so he makes fewer outs than Alonso and Schwarber, and he's more likely to get a hit in certain situations. And I feel like that's why he's more valuable, and that's why teams are loading up to see what he has. The latest reports are the two teams that are the most aggressive are the Tampa Bay Rays and the Boston Red Sox, per Francis Romero. And that report came out on Friday. So then we look at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay just swung a couple trades over the weekend. They traded Shane Baz to the Baltimore Orioles for a prospect haul, including right-handers Michael Forret. This is the headliner. Also Slater DeBrun, a draft pick. Caden Bodine, another player that was floated about as a mock pick for the Diamondbacks in the 2024 draft, I believe, as well. That's not all that Tampa Bay got. Tampa Bay got a haul, considering they traded within the division. You ask for more if you trade within the division. And then obviously trading a controllable starter hurts what they can offer, what Tampa Bay can offer in terms of immediate impact. The Diamondbacks were talking about getting both Shane Baz and Ryan Pepio in the same deal for Ketel Marte, and then obviously you'd have to throw in more because Marte is more valuable than those two, because you're talking a top 10 bat with 5 years of control at a very cheap rate, And that's why the Rays would probably be interested in that, looking for a deal for an elite bat. But now their top assets are more prospects versus MLB-ready return, and I don't think the Diamondbacks are going to settle for a prospect-heavy return without a taker for those prospects. And there just aren't that many teams that fit that profile. You don't have a rebuilding team that is looking to sell controllable players in this market. So it's going to be tough for the Rays to put a trade together. That's something that Ken Rosenthal reported for The Athletic, that Tampa Bay, with one fewer controllable starter, is going to have a tougher time convincing the Diamondbacks to part with Marte. Even if they were to include a quantity over quality prospect return on top of Ryan Pepio as the trade package for Ketel Marte. And because of that, it's like now you're down to Tampa Bay and Boston. If Boston would throw in Peyton Tully and Connolly early, or if they wanted to only trade one pitcher, you throw in Marcelo Mayer. If Diamondbacks can't get two of those three prospects, or well, technically Mayer is not a prospect, Diamondbacks can't get two of those three players, I don't see a Ketel Marte deal to Boston happening. And if neither team is able to offer the Diamondbacks something worthwhile for Ketel Marte, I think you can just pencil him in for opening day 2026, and that's going to be March 26th at Dodger Stadium. And if that happens, the likelihood, obviously, Marte's not going to get traded in the first 9 days of the 2026 season. So if Marte is on the roster come March 26th, we can basically guarantee that he'll gain 10-5 rights on April 6th. And that allows him to, and 10-5 rights is basically a no-trade clause with to the rest of the league. At 10 years service time and the last 5 years of the same team, you get a player is allowed to veto any trade involving him. Now, of course, when you have a team that signs a player in free agency, usually there's a no-trade clause involved. When Marte's extension is no different, he has 5 teams listed as no trade. The Giants, which obviously we don't have to worry about that trade. There's no way the Diamondbacks are going to trade Ketel Marte to the Giants with more than a year left on that contract. And we're talking about 5 years remaining. They're not going to trade a top bat within their division and make it literally 10 times harder for them to compete. So we can rule out the Giants. We can rule Pittsburgh is another team on that list, and Pittsburgh's kind of in a weird situation. They have the best pitcher in the world in Paul Skeens, but the rest of the roster isn't very good. Now, they swung a pretty big trade, and I thought it was a good trade for them. Burrows is probably the one pitcher. They traded Mike Burrows in a 3-team trade involving Houston and Tampa. And Burrows, to me, was the most expendable pitcher, young pitcher that the Pirates had, because he has a middling fastball, and it got poor results in 2025. Whereas he has electric secondary stuff, the slider and the changeup were very good. So he's going to Houston. Whereas Pittsburgh in that deal is picking up Mace Montgomery, a hard-throwing lefty that has the occasional control issues, but when he's around the strike zone, he is unhittable. 100-mile-an-hour fastball with a 90-mile slider. And then they also got Brandon Lau, who's going to be an interesting fit. Lau is around the same age as Marte. He's got 1 year left in his contract. Pretty cheap, I think like $10.5 million. The Rays exercised that club option. But he's kind of a poor fit for second base. He's a worse defender than Ketel Marte at second base. So it'll be interesting what they do there. He could be a primary DH option for them. Maybe they move him to left field because the Pirates don't really have much offense in their lineup. They can put him wherever they want. Keith Law floated the possibility of left field for Brandon Lau. So there's certainly a spot for the Pirates to add Ketel Marte, but obviously Marte has zero interest in going to a rebuilding club, even if it has the best pitcher in the world as their headline player, and he's kind of starting to voice his, I guess you can say the right word is disappointment that the Pirates are basically doing nothing to build a winning team around him, and that was true when they had Garrett Cole as well. Garrett Cole was the number 1 pick in the 2011 draft, the same year Diamondbacks took Trevor Bauer and Archie Bradley. Garrett Cole, they didn't really, well, actually in the case of Garrett Cole, they did make the playoffs with him in 2013, which is the last time Pittsburgh's had a meaningful postseason run. But they didn't really build around it afterwards, and kind of that short-lived run that Pittsburgh had in the 2010s. So they ended up, of course, the thing that hurt them most was the Chris Archer trade And Shane Baz, we just talked about, was part of that deal. Baz was drafted the previous year and then was part of the package for Chris Archer. And then that flopped, and then the Pirates ended up trading Garrett Cole to the Astros before that trade, which is kind of funny. It's like you can't trade Garrett Cole and then you sink your franchise with the Chris Archer trade. Not too long after that. But anyways, we're getting too far off topic. Let's get back to Ketel Marte. So 3 other teams. The Cardinals are another team. And St. Louis is already showing that they're going to at least retool, rebuild. They traded Sonny Gray to the Boston Red Sox for a prospect called Richard Fitz and Brendan Clark coming back. Clark being a high ceiling but very volatile arm. Fitz is a guy that can basically slot in the Grays rotation spot, even if the production's not even going to be close. And then the Yankees are there as well. The Yankees are a team. I wonder if with the Yankees, I wonder if they're a common no trade clause team. I have no idea if that's the case. But certainly Marte probably wouldn't like their hair policy. And then the final team, I believe, is the Athletics organization. I have no idea what they're doing, but they might lock into some good players nonetheless. We've got an interesting infield. Jacob Wilson's a plausible shortstop. Nick Kurtz looks like the next slugger, the next impact slugger. Maybe I would think of Nick Kurtz as a perennial all-star candidate for the Athletics, and probably the player they want to make the face of their franchise as they head to Las Vegas whenever that comes to pass. Whenever that team finally gets into Las Vegas. Those are the 5 teams that are on Ketel Marte's no trade list, and I can assume that there's no 3 of those teams, the Diamondbacks, aren't even entertaining a trade to. The Giants, the Cardinals, and the Athletics, I assume are the 3 teams that. The Athletics, I would say. The Yankees, obviously, I don't think Diamondbacks are going to be sending Ketel Marte to the Yankees unless they get a haul. So those are the 5 teams that Marte can veto a trade to. When the 10-5 rights kicks in, it goes from 5 teams to 29. And that's why the Diamondbacks are listening intently. This is the last offseason. They can listen to offers on Ketel Marte and they can trade him at peak value. Because once those 10-5 rights kick in next season, no longer the case. However, I believe it's a situation where they're not getting the offers they like. They're going to pull him from the market soon. Gambo tweeted about that, and I'll pull that up. So Gambo tweeted that the Diamondbacks are going to pull Ketel Marte if they don't get anything they like soon. And a Ketel Marte trade is still not imminent from both Francis Romero and Ketel Marte. And quoting Gambo here, nothing is imminent on the Ketel Marte trade front, but this is going to end, and soon. I do not see this dragging out much further. It's pretty simple. If the D-backs get an acceptable trade offer worthy of moving a superstar player, which as of now they have not, then we will likely see a trade. And if they don't, I would expect them to shut it down and move on to other areas of concern, and Marte will remain a Diamondback. Of course, he spelled expect wrong, but that's nitpicking. Switch the C and the P. He spelled it as accept, but that's not important. So like I said, the Ketel Marte rumors I think are coming to an end soon. I would be shocked. There's probably going to be a report by January 15th that the Diamondbacks are like, okay, we just don't get them. We're not getting the offers that we want. So we're good. And I say this, it's like, okay, don't take the trade. Like, the best trade you can make is the one you don't. Because you're not going to find that kind of bat for the price that you're having. And I still think there's something to be said about keeping a star in there while he's in his prime years on a team-friendly contract. You can build around that. You can still build around that. Marte's deal is not going to go underwater at all at any point in his career. I feel very strongly that deal will age very well. So with that in mind, it's like, I would put money on the Diamondbacks keeping Ketel Marte for the next 5 seasons. And that's probably going to be it. Like I said, there's not much to talk about unless something happens moving forward. Moving on to the next topic. Over the weekend, we had a minor trade involving a player on the 40-man roster. Diamondbacks traded left-handed reliever Kyle Backhus to the Philadelphia Phillies for outfield prospect Avery Owusu-Asiedu. And I'm pretty sure I butchered that name. So, when we look at that trade, it's like it's not really a big trade. The Diamondbacks obviously trading a player of an area of weakness. The Diamondbacks' next biggest need to address is the bullpen. And of course, you're losing a little bit of left-hand pitching depth with Kyle Backhus, who's a drop-down lefty, throws the classic sinker-slider mix of a low-arm slot lefty. And because of that, he's going to have a pretty decent career. If you pull up his StatCast metrics, which I love using. StatCast is my go-to for analyzing pitchers and hitters, and it's public facing if you know what to interpret from them. So from Bacchus's case, Bacchus is very good at limiting hard contact. If you look at his StatCast page, he doesn't walk guys, 7% walk rate, a 4.9% barrel. So he's not giving up hard hit contact at the optimal launch angles that leads to extra base hits, and barrel rate is a good metric because of that. Hard hit rate is exceptional. 35% is a very good hard hit rate allowed. So if you look at Bacchus, he's certainly fooling guys. He's not giving up a lot of hard hit, although he is giving up a lot of singles. If you look at his expected batting average, 268, expected ERA, 452. And that's mostly because of the case that it's like he's not generating a lot of chases, not a lot of whiffs. His chase rate's only at 25.9%, whiff rate 21.8%. And because of that, I feel like this is a case where the Diamondbacks are trying to recoup value on a player that was a DFA candidate possibly in the 2026 season. I don't know if they would have DFA'd him necessarily now if they had to. But because of the weak chase and whiff swing and miss profile, Bacchus got buried on the depth chart. So you got Saul Frank and Garcia competing for your top lefty role. I think Garcia is going to eventually win it long term, because who doesn't love a guy that throws 97 with sinkers that basically take a left turn, and a sweeper that coming in at 85 with the same action except in the other direction. And then he has a bullet slider as his third pitch, but that's not important. And Garcia obviously is a guy, I watched him a couple times, like he can strike anybody out. He's had some pretty big games against some good teams. Like his outing against the Dodgers to me was the real eye-opener, where he faced the middle of the Dodgers order and he decimated them. And that came after his last appearance against the San Francisco Giants, where he turned Heliot Ramos and Matt Chapman into chumps in a high-leverage spot. And I know Garcia's numbers aren't very good if you look at the whole season thing, but when we talk about young pitchers, talk about a guy that I think we'll get more swing and miss, more chases in 2026 as he's more comfortable at the major league level. To me, he is a top 3 reliever in the Diamondbacks bullpen, regardless of who they add. And he's a tough guy to hit, and he's going to be a tough guy to hit. And because he throws hard with electric stuff, he's going to eventually sell towards the back end of the bullpen. I view him as the AJ Puck successor in the bullpen. Diamondbacks don't really have a lot of lefties in their system that throw better than 90. Like Ryan Bruno obviously is a guy in the low minors that's a lottery ticket because he could throw that hard. And because of that, he's getting a lot of strikeouts when he's around the strike zone. Of course, that's an issue they need to try and fix as they move forward with their new pitching pipeline. They'll hopefully get better results with change in personnel running the group. So I have Garcia. Andrew Saalfrank has, for better or worse, despite having what would look like mediocre stuff on paper, has succeeded as a reliever everywhere he's gone. He's pitched well. It's one of those things where it's like, his stuff doesn't jump off the page, but guy knows how to pitch. Cliche comes to mind. And we're talking about a reliever that has, maybe he doesn't have that sustainable long term, but Saalfrank does get a lot of swing and miss. It's just a matter of turning those into strikeouts. Maybe we'll see more strikeout upside in the future, and if not, he's a ground ball pitcher that suppresses hard contact. I still think that Garcia will take over the top lefty role, but Saalfrank is certainly a candidate to start in that situation, just simply because he's the most, right now of the current bullpen, the most tested healthy arm going into the offseason. That's just one way to put it. You have that offseason. I mean, you have the postseason that he had in 2023 as a rookie. Well, technically, he was also a rookie in 25. So you have that. And Saul Frank was the Diamondbacks' most trusted reliever that's coming back. Like Beeks and Shelby Miller were the only other two starters that had 3 shutdowns for every meltdown on the roster. Saul Frank was 13-3, Miller 16-5, and no, Beeks was under 3. I think he was 14-6. So those were your top 3 relievers in 2025. And then you also had Philip Abner, who I think is a candidate to push. I think Abner's a candidate to push Saul Frank to your number 3 lefty role. It's kind of interesting. Abner's a guy who gets a lot of swing and miss. You look up at the board, it's like 90, how? And much of it is Abner's a case where his stuff just doesn't make sense. A cutting four-seam fastball. Basically, he's got a good cutter as his four-seamer. If you look at the profile on his four-seamer, if you go to a StatCast page, it is 13 up and 2 glove side. 13 inches up, that's induced vertical break. 2 inches glove side for a fastball. And hitters see fastball, they're going to see something that rises and tends to drift arm side. So even though he doesn't necessarily get a lot of rise on a four-seam fastball that averages 90.4 miles per hour, the weird shape does lead to swing and miss because you're expecting something different. And for whatever reason, and then Kyle Schwarber can tell you this firsthand, that fastball plays at the top of the zone. It's almost what Lance Brodowski describes as a, quote, fun cutter. And then, of course, he has a very sweepy slider as well, and that might be just necessarily mechanics. Slider's under 80 miles an hour, but it has both depth and sweep to it. So Abner at worst is going to be a lefty. I feel like Abner's floor is a very good lefty killer. And of course, he's not going to be a ground ball pitcher because he is a guy that likes to throw elevated force. His fastball plays up, so he's not going to give up a lot of ground ball contact with a weird fastball shape. And when you look at the metrics, this is obviously small sample size. We have to small sample size these metrics because we're talking 5 games and 3 2/3 innings. Abner got a chase rate of 36% and a strikeout rate of almost 28%. Diamondbacks don't have a lot of swing and miss in their bullpen, and I feel like Philip Abner should make the opening day roster in 2026. Like, he's one of the 8 best relievers in this bullpen, no matter who they add. The situation, as I mentioned in the last episode, there are a couple under the radar guys with Gilbert Diaz and Dre Jameson that could certainly factor in the bullpen mix, but I feel pretty confident in Garcia, Saul Frank, and Abner making the opening day roster next year. They all have something to offer this bullpen. Whereas I feel like Kyle Bacchus was a guy he was going to be an early camp cut because I don't see him carrying more than 3 lefties in that bullpen. And he has trade value because of his ability to suppress contact. I don't know if he'll develop swing and miss, but he's shown swing and miss ability in AAA. His strikeout rate was 34% at the time of his call-up. So I'm pretty sure the Phillies are taking a look at that and say, okay, we could have a potentially useful reliever on the cheap, all 3 options remaining, and all we have to give up is a lottery ticket to skip the waiver wire. We'll do that. And that's a situation where it's one of those things where you got to free up a 40-man roster spot for Merrill Kelly's reunion, and we'll talk about Kelly at the end. And with Kelly leading a 40-man roster spot, half the Diamondbacks 40-man roster almost coming off injuries. It's like, who are they going to do? And then, of course, Bacchus being expendable and having trade value, they decided to make a trade for an outfield prospect that has, I guess I call it a lottery ticket because there's upside that you could gamble on. Maybe but a low chance of reaching the major leagues. It's like the same odds of trying to win the lottery. So Owusu Osiedu is a interesting outfield prospect, kind of different than what the Diamondbacks have in their system. They don't really have a big physical guy that runs well and big power upside. They don't have that in their outfield system. They have smaller, speedier guys like Caldwell 5'9". Drew Jones isn't necessarily a behemoth. He's 6'3". and listed at 108. He's probably heavier than that, but he's listed at 180 pounds, more of that tall, slender build. Ryan Waldschmidt is about 6'2", 200, pretty average-ish build, I would say. Not necessarily a big power guy, but certainly the Diamondbacks' top prospect. And that's the Diamondbacks' outfield prospect situation wrapped up into a neat package. You got a bunch of big guys, Jack Hurley, Gavin Conticello, guys that might get a look at the major league level in a certain situation, but you're not necessarily banking on them to do much long term. And in the case of Conticello, he's kind of interesting because he's hit everywhere he's gone. He's hit right-hand pitching everywhere he's gone. So he projects as kind of like a 40-plus platoon, 40-plus future value guy, platoon outfield bat. Maybe you give him a look if he hits well in AAA next year. So it's a case where the Diamondbacks are adding upside at the cost of depth in the situation. It's not necessarily something to make too much analysis of. Of course, I'm the guy that does that. Spends 10 minutes talking about that. But that's just how I see it. So, Diamondbacks did make a minor league signing over the weekend. Ildemaro Vargas is back, providing more veteran infield depth. And that's one of those camp signings. I don't expect Vargas to make the roster. It's going to depend on what the infield looks like on March 26th. So Diamondbacks have a situation where they have a lot of middle infielders that don't have roles because you have two all-stars at your middle infield spot with Geraldo Perdomo and Ketel Marte. And with the increasing odds that Marte is going to be a Diamondback in 2026, now you got to ask yourself, okay, where does Jordan Lawler play? Do we trade him or not? And Diamondbacks also have the same questions with Blaze Alexander, although I feel like Alexander's got a more clear path of the roster as a super utility guy, possibly. Whereas Alexander, of course, looked good at third base. That's one possibility. They could start him there if they wanted to play him at one spot. But he could also play second. Theoretically, could play shortstop, although has never asked to play shortstop in 2025 after a rough showing in 2024 that you could argue Blaze's shortstop defense did the D-backs in based on how close they were to missing the playoffs. Sorry, Blaze. And then he also got some looks in left field and center field. And they might ask him to do that because Alexander's very athletic, has a good arm, so he kind of profiles well for that super utility role. I don't know if he'll hit right-hand pitching enough to justify playing on a near everyday basis. Because at the end of the day, if you don't hit righties, you're going to be a short-side and platoon player, and that's 200 to 300 plate appearances in the season. You're not going to make a lot of money doing that. And Paul Goldschmidt's probably going to find that out this offseason as well. As a lefty-killing first base only option, he's probably looking at a $4 to $6 million market on a one-year deal. But we can talk about Goldie on a different podcast episode. So anyways, going back to the topic of Vargas. Vargas, for the most part, it's like you feel comfortable with him playing first, second, and third base in a situation. And that's a situation where the Diamondbacks aren't necessarily settled at third base, trying to figure out what's the deal with Alexander. And Vargas isn't a long-term answer. He's a good bench bat that can play multiple positions, but you don't want to rely on him as a starter. And the Diamondbacks kind of in a situation where Vargas is almost playing every day at the end of the season because their first base situation got pretty bad with the Tyler Locklear injury that's going to linger into the start of the 2026 season. Jordan Lawler doesn't necessarily profile well for third base, so I think he's an outfield conversion candidate. I don't know if he's working on that. There wasn't much there. And Lawler and Blaze Alexander's long-term futures aren't settled. And then of course, in 2026, that picture's going to get even more muddier when Tommy Troy starts banging on the door for an opportunity, same as Lou James Groover. Both will be likely on the Reno opening day roster come March 26th. But I could imagine both players will get a decent look in spring training this year. See where they're at, and then how long it might take them to get back to the major league roster. So in the case of Vargas, you know what you're getting. Guy gives you professional at bats. He'll put the ball in play. Doesn't necessarily slug. Doesn't walk, and he hits for an okay average while playing multiple positions. And you're okay with that because as your 12th or 13th player on the roster, you're just looking for guys that are good at doing the little things, giving you professional at-bats being one of them, being able to play consistent defense, and that's what Vargas does at the positions that he's able to play. Now, if the Diamondbacks want him to play shortstop, that's definitely not something he's, in my opinion, he's capable of. But as a backup option at first base, second base, and third base, he does have some roster utility as a back-of-the-bench player. And then it shouldn't be too difficult. I don't know what the 40-man roster situation is going to be after spring, but I feel like if the Diamondbacks don't have other options, and I don't think we're going to have a Garrett Hampson situation where the Diamondbacks just straight up allowed Hampson to make the roster despite being beat out by Vargas, in my opinion. Even though Hampson has no track record of being a good hitter, and you know what you have in Vargas. But that's definitely a rant that I shouldn't spend too much time on. So, TLDR on Vargas. Useful bench bat. We should see him at some point in 2026. Maybe he doesn't start the year on the major league roster, but when injuries happen on the infield, I think it's a case where you take a veteran player, you know what you're getting out of him, and you feel comfortable playing him situation. Where I think Vargas is going to probably play about 80-ish or so games ultimately at the end of the season. Most of it coming at second base and third base. That first base situation is kind of ugly, too, as well. And at the end of the day, it's like, we shouldn't spend too much complaining about a guy who just does a certain thing. And that's my take on that. So to close out the podcast, we're going to share some interesting news involving Merrill Kelly. We talked about Kelly signing a 2-year, $40 million deal, and the possibility of him retiring as a Diamondback in a previous episode, episode 3. Kelly actually finalized the deal that he signed with the Diamondbacks at Alek Thomas's wedding. That's a fun story. If you want to read that on the SI website. But in the case of Kelly is now a Diamondback, and there's a good chance he could retire as a Diamondback if he gets his 3 years out of that contract, the 3 years out of that contract. So one of the interesting storylines that came out after Kelly's deal was finalized and announced was a report from The Athletic from Dennis Lin, who covers the Padres for The Athletic, said that the Padres made a run at Merrill Kelly, and it's worth noting that Ken Rosenthal reported that Merrill Kelly turned down 3-year guaranteed deals north of $50 million, and I wouldn't be surprised if San Diego was a team that offered that, and Kelly turned those offers down to return to Arizona, and I felt like it was a situation with Kelly where it's like, if the Diamondbacks had any competitive interest in bringing back Merrill Kelly was going to say yes, and that's exactly what happened. So I don't know if I'll have to read that report on Merrill Kelly, but it sounds like the Padres were serious about Merrill Kelly before Kelly signed with the Diamondbacks. Padres ultimately pivoted back to Michael King on a 3-year, $75 million deal, which is basically a 1 then a 2-year deal. That will very much depend on how well King pitches in 2026. If King repeats his 2024 numbers, he's going to opt out, and if he does, well, the Padres are paying a top of the rotation price for a mid-rotation starter, which isn't necessarily going to kill you on a payroll thing, but certainly dollars could be better spent elsewhere, especially after losing Dylan Cease to a $200 million deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. So going off that report from Dennis Lin, Lin is reporting that the Padres made what was considered a competitive offer for Merrill Kelly. I don't know if he was one of those teams that offered $50 million guaranteed. And of course, Kelly, if he hits that vesting option, will end up making more money anyway, so it's a win-win for both his bank account and his desire to stay in Arizona. Everybody wins in that situation with a vested interest in the Diamondbacks. I don't know. As I said, the Padres might have been one of those teams. I don't know if they were. But I think it's a situation where things played out well for both teams. Diamondbacks getting Kelly back, the Padres getting King back. King gets a pretty good deal that offers him $75 million guaranteed at the worst, and the opportunity to hit the market again. And that may be the type of contract that Zach Gallen gets in the free agent market. Although it's going to be tough for a team other than Diamondbacks to offer that type of deal for Gallen. Maybe we talk about that in the next episode. But I'm wondering if we'll see some movement on the starting pitching market soon. Obviously, the Diamondbacks are waiting to see what Zach Gallen signs for, and it sounds like he's going to be signing with another club based on the reporting coming out at the end of the season. That Gallen could net the Diamondbacks a draft pick, and if that's the case, the Diamondbacks will have 3 of the top 32 draft picks in the 2026 draft, a chance to add impact talent to the top of their farm system. And when I say top of the farm system, we're talking top 10 rankings. Not necessarily the high levels of the minor league system, although we wouldn't mind more players that zip through the system like Waldschmidt. Of course, college baseball is getting really good at evaluating and developing players to the point where the elite college baseball talent seems to just rocket up the minor leagues. I mean, that was true before the current techniques of player development were a thing. You can look at Mike Leake, Xavier Nady, if you want to look at former Diamondbacks that's essentially skipped the minor leagues, where it's like 2 years, they're in the major leagues within 2 years of their draft day. And that might be true for Waldschmidt as well, depending on how the left field situation unfolds and how well he hits in AAA. But we're getting off topic here, so ultimately, this should be a interesting week coming up, like I said, with the Marte rumors. Stay tuned for that. Like I said, you'll be seeing more written content coming out. I have a newsletter coming out before this. If you haven't seen that yet, that should be in your email inbox, talking about the same topics we're talking about here, except the Padres angle of the Merrill Kelly thing. And we should see what happens next in the upcoming weeks as we get into the holiday breaks. So if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to like the video, subscribe. Remember, liking and subscribing does not cost you any financial money to do so. This is YouTube. Subscribing is free. All you gotta do is click a button. Click that subscribe button. And then comment down below if you think the Rays are a legit threat to trade for Ketel Marte, if they can find a third team that gives the Diamondbacks an MLB-ready return, or comment if you think Marte will be in the D-backs opening day roster, batting second, playing second base. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a Merry Christmas.